Across the open plains of Kansas, where the land stretches endlessly beneath wide skies. Rusting tracks vanish into tall grass. Abandoned sidings sit quietly beside the rails. Empty boxcars rot under the sun. But when night falls, the rails remember. Metal groans without wind. Footsteps echo on gravel with no one in sight. And distant train whistles cry out from tracks that have not felt wheels in decades. Rail sidings were once places of waiting. Of long nights. Of accidents, disappearances, and final goodbyes. Some workers never went home. Some travelers vanished between stops. And some trains were never found again. Tonight, we walk beside the silent rails. Through the most haunted abandoned rail sidings in Kansas. Places where the past still arrives on schedule. And where something always waits in the dark. Hello, my dear friend. I am truly grateful you are here with me tonight. I hope you are somewhere safe and comfortable. Because the places we are about to visit are lonely, cold, and far from help. Kansas is known for its railroads. They carried grain, cattle, supplies, and people across the heart of America. Rail sidings were built along these routes. Small stretches of track where trains waited, passed, loaded, or rested. Many were isolated. Miles from towns. Surrounded by nothing but wind and prairie. Accidents happened often. Workers were crushed between cars. Travelers fell from moving trains. Some were buried right beside the tracks. When rail lines shut down, the sidings were abandoned. The trains stopped coming. But the stories never left. People walking near old tracks report hearing engines approaching. Seeing lantern lights moving between boxcars. And feeling vibrations beneath their feet when no train is there. Before we step closer to the rails, let me ask you something. If you were standing alone at an abandoned rail siding at night and heard a train approaching at full speed, but saw nothing on the tracks, would you stay to listen or run as fast as you could? Now slow your breathing. Listen to the wind across the prairie. And let us begin our journey through the haunted abandoned rail sidings of Kansas. On a remote stretch of the old Northern Line, where the rails curve sharply around the base of a granite hillside, there is a place known as Black Iron Siding. It is a passing loop, a short stretch of parallel track long since fallen into disuse. The rails are rusted, and the wooden ties are rotten and being reclaimed by weeds. A single, battered metal shed, its corrugated siding blackened by decades of soot and weather, gives the place its name. By day, it is a still life of abandonment, silent except for the wind in the tall grass. But after dark, the silence is shattered. The first sound is a distant, metallic groan, like a great weight straining against itself. The first sound is a distant, metallic groan, like a great weight straining against itself. It builds into the piercing, agonized screech of iron wheels grinding against a tight curve. A sound that carries for miles across the empty landscape. This is followed by a series of distinct, violent crashes. The heavy, resonant slam of train car couplers connecting. The jarring bang of buffer plates meeting, and the shuddering clatter of an entire line of freight cars coming to a sudden, protesting halt. The sounds are unmistakably real, spatially coherent, and seem to originate from the empty tracks themselves. They paint an auditory picture of a phantom train arriving, a ghostly consist being assembled in the darkness. Visitors who have braved the siding at night describe a palpable sense of pressure in the air, a vibration they feel in their bones rather than hear. They report the smell of hot iron and old grease materializing with the sounds, then dissipating just as quickly. The screeching curve, the successive impacts of coupling. And then, finally, a deep, hissing release, like air brakes settling. After that, the profound silence of the countryside returns, leaving only the witness and the empty moonlit rails. The history of this bend is one of necessity and tragedy. The sharp curve was an engineering compromise, blasted from the hillside to avoid an even more expensive tunnel. For the steam engines of its era, it was a challenging but manageable feature. The siding was built here specifically to allow slower freight trains to pull over and let faster passenger expresses hurtle past on the main line. It was a place of precise timing and careful coordination. The incident that haunts the siding occurred on an autumn night in 1923. A heavy freight, carrying iron ore, was shunted onto the siding to wait. Its crew applied the brakes, but a faulty valve on the last car failed to hold. Slowly, inexorably, the massive train began to roll backwards down the slight grade of the siding, gathering momentum as it approached the curve onto the main line. At that exact moment, the westbound Midnight Express was rounding the bend. The Freighter's caboose slid onto the main line seconds before the passenger train arrived. The collision was catastrophic, a tangle of wood and steel and escaping steam. While the loss of life was mercifully limited due to the sturdy construction of the Express's lead car, the wreckage was immense, and the sounds of the impact were said to have been horrific, echoing off the granite walls of the cut for hours. After the wreck was cleared, the tracks were repaired, and traffic resumed. But the sounds did not leave. Crews on night runs began reporting the phantom noises. The siding was eventually decommissioned, the rails left to rust, as if the land itself could no longer support the weight of real traffic there. Scientific explanations have focused on acoustic residue and geology. The sharp curve and the specific composition of the local stone are known to create unusual sound propagation effects. Some theorists suggest that the tremendous energy of the collision, both sonic and kinetic, was imprinted upon the granite, and that certain atmospheric conditions, like temperature inversions on cool nights, caused the stone to release this stored energy as sound. Recordings of the phenomena, when analyzed, reveal the sounds are not random, but a perfect sequence of a train taking the curve too fast and the subsequent, brutal coupling of mismatched forces. To stand at black iron siding under a starry sky is to wait for a ghost train that will never arrive. The screech, when it comes, is a lance of pure memory, a replay of metal under impossible stress. The following crashes are not malicious, but mechanical, the sound of a disaster locked in a loop. It is a haunting not of souls, but of physics, of a single, terrible moment when momentum and timing fatally aligned. The blackened shed stands as a mute witness, and the rails, though they lead nowhere now, still carry the echo of that night, conducting it up from the cold stone and into the still air, a permanent auditory monument to a split-second decision made by a faulty valve, and the world-shattering noise that followed. On the high plains, where the land is flat and the sky is a vast, unbroken dome, lies Dust Mile Junction. It is not a town, nor even a true station anymore. It is a place where two sets of railroad tracks intersect in a perfect X, surrounded by nothing but bleached grass and silence. The wind here is a permanent resident, a low, mournful force that performs its daily, meticulous work. It sweeps a fine, pale dust across the iron rails and wooden ties in endless, shifting waves. By evening, the junction is a smooth, unmarked canvas, every trace of the day erased by this ceaseless, granular tide. Yet, each morning reveals a contradiction. In the pristine dust, beside the southbound track, a single line of footprints appears. They are not animal tracks. They are the clear impressions of human feet, wearing what appear to be heavy, worn boots. They materialize overnight, as if a walker has descended from the empty plain itself. Their path is unerringly direct. The footprints begin several yards from the tracks, approaching from the open prairie. They walk a straight line toward the rails with a steady, purposeful stride. They reach the gravel bed. And here, they do something peculiar. Instead of crossing the tracks, or walking alongside them, the footprints step directly between the two parallel rails. They settle into the narrow gauge, where the crossties are spaced just far enough for a person to walk. The prints continue down this precise, confined path, perfectly centered, as if following an invisible guide rail. They walk the dust mile, the straight, isolated stretch leading to the junction is heart. And at the exact point where the two sets of tracks intersect. At the center of the X, the footprints stop. The final impression is deep and clear, facing forward along the track. There is no sign of a step to the side, no indication of a body falling or being lifted. They do not continue on the other side of the crossing. They simply cease. The wind, in its patient, relentless way, will begin blurring them by mid-morning, scouring them away only to find them perfectly reformed the next day, tracing the same silent, doomed path. The history of this junction is one of quiet utility and a single, obscure tragedy. It was a remote maintenance stop, a place where section crews would be dropped off for weeks at a time to repair miles of isolated track. In the autumn of 1917, a crew foreman named Jonah Pelt was working alone on this stretch, inspecting the line ahead of his crew. A sudden, blinding dust storm, a phenomenon known as a dust white, rolled across the plains. When the storm passed an hour later, Jonah Pelt was gone. His tools were neatly laid beside the track. The only sign of him was a single set of footprints leading away into the dust-choked prairie. A search party followed them. The tracks walked straight for a mile, then vanished abruptly, as if he had been plucked from the earth. He was never found. This historical fragment offers a key. The phenomenon at Dust Mile Junction does not seem to be a ghost, but perhaps an echo of a habit, or a moment of profound disorientation. Jonah Pelt's life was defined by the tracks. Walking the line, centered between the rails, was his profession, his purpose. The footprints may be a residual imprint of that professional ritual, playing out eternally. Their abrupt end mirrors the mystery of his disappearance, a path that leads to a literal vanishing point. But the choice of the junction is significant. An intersection is a place of decision, of potential change in direction. The footprints ignore this. They follow their single-minded course directly into the center of the crossing and stop. As if the concept of a turn, of another path, is incomprehensible. It is the echo of a man who knew only one way to go, walking it forever into a destination that does not exist. To witness these footprints at dawn is to observe a stark and lonely paradox. They are evidence of motion, yet they lead only to a perfect cessation. The wind, which erases all else, seems to preserve this one, futile journey. It speaks to the power of habit, and the terrifying mystery that can interrupt even the most routine of paths. Dust Mile Junction tells a story without a conclusion. The footprints are not seeking anything. A man walking his line, a path burned into the memory of the land itself. Always walking into the center of a crossing where every possible choice leads nowhere at all. At the edge of the vast prairie, where the long grasses whisper against forgotten steel, lies Lantern Post Siding. It is less a town and more a memory of one. A ghost of the railroading age. The old depot sags gently into the soil. Its windows boarded, its purpose lost to time. But one structure remains defiantly upright. A solitary sentinel at the far end of the crumbling platform. It is a tall, cast-iron lamppost, its metal skin blistered with rust, its glass long since shattered and gone. No wires connect it to any grid. The few residents who remain, mostly descendants of the track layers and station agents, speak little of the post. They acknowledge its presence with a glance, not a story. They will, however, offer a single, practical piece of advice to any visitor. Be indoors, and be abed, before midnight. The reason is never elaborated upon. It is delivered as one might mention the likelihood of a passing storm, a simple fact of the local climate. The phenomenon is both punctual and precise. When the last sliver of daylight has been swallowed by the western horizon. And the deep, true dark of the prairie settles in. But at the exact stroke of midnight, as measured by the old station clock now frozen in a glass case, a change occurs. At the top of the rusted lamppost, a light kindles. It is not the harsh white of modern bulbs, but a soft, oily, yellow glow. The light of a flame encased in sooty glass, though no glass remains. For several minutes, it simply burns, a lonely beacon in an ocean of darkness. Then, with a slowness that is almost ceremonial, it begins to move. The glow detaches, floating at the same height, and begins a slow, steady progression down the railway tracks. It travels eastward, following the path of the vanished rails, now just two faint lines of gravel in the dirt. Its pace is walking speed, a patient, plodding advance. The yellow light bobs slightly, as if carried at arm's length by an unseen traveler. It illuminates just enough of the world immediately around it. The weathered tips of the railroad ties. A patch of scrubby brush. The gleaming eyes of a coyote that watches from a distance before melting away. The light does not speed up, nor does it slow. It maintains its solemn procession for exactly 1 mile, as measured from the old post to the place where the trestle bridge once spanned a dry wash. Upon reaching that precise point, the light stops. It dims, not with a sudden snap, but like a candle being gently smothered. It shrinks to a pinpoint. And then vanishes, leaving the night darker and more immense than before. The rails return to invisibility. The siding is just a place again. A retired signal engineer named Arthur came to Lantern Post Siding. The locals told him about the light. He was a man of circuits and logic, fascinated by the mechanical remnants of the past. He decided to witness it for himself, setting up a tripod with a night vision camera on the depot's roof. He watched the light appear at the top of the post. His instruments registered no heat signature, no electromagnetic spike. It was just light, pure and simple, where no source existed. Then he watched it move. His professional mind searched for explanations. A will-o'-the-wisp, swamp gas, though the land was dry. A reflection from a distant car, though no road ran that way. Every hypothesis failed against the evidence of his eyes and the steady, deliberate pace of the glow down the abandoned right-of-way. The next day, he found the oldest resident, a man who tended a small garden where the water tower once stood. Over a shared lunch, the man spoke not of ghosts, but of duty. He told Arthur about the last station master, a man named Eli, who took his role as the keeper of the night schedule with profound seriousness. When the line was decommissioned and the trains stopped running, Eli could not accept it. He believed a train was still coming, that someone, somewhere, still needed the light to guide them in. So every night, he would light his lantern at midnight and walk the track to the trestle, holding it high to check the rails for obstructions, to ensure the way was clear for the train that would never arrive. He did this until the day he could no longer walk. The man in the garden believed the light was not Eli's spirit, but his routine, etched into the fabric of the place. The commitment was so absolute, so unwavering, that the siding itself remembers the ritual and repeats it, a testament to a promise made. Arthur packed his camera. He filed his report on the structural integrity of the depot. He made no mention of the light in his official submission. Some records are best kept in the human heart, not in an archive. He now understands the quiet respect the residents have for that rusted post. They are not afraid of the light. They live in a place where dedication left a permanent mark. Where a man's sense of responsibility was so strong it became a feature of the landscape. The nightly journey of the yellow glow is not a haunting. It is the echo of a man keeping his watch. Ensuring the tracks are safe. Waiting for the train he promised would find its way home. And in Lantern Post Siding, they have all agreed to let him continue his rounds, in peace, forever. High in the mountain passes, where the roads coil like serpents around sheer cliffs, there is a place known to truckers and travelers as Broken Break Point. It is not a town, but a wide, gravel-scattered pull-off on the edge of a breathtaking vista. The view is magnificent, a sweeping panorama of valleys and distant peaks. But visitors do not come for the scenery. Their eyes are drawn downward, to the ground at their feet. Piles of old brake parts lie scattered like metallic tumbleweeds. Discs warped by extreme heat, shattered drums, pads worn down to bare metal, and the twisted remains of brake shoes. They are rusted monuments to moments of sheer terror, discarded by relieved drivers who made it here alive. The stretch of road leading to the point is a notorious 5-mile descent, a relentless series of tight switchbacks with no guardrails. For decades, truckers carrying heavy loads dreaded this pass. The constant, firm pressure needed on the brakes would generate immense heat, a phenomenon called brake fade. If the brakes overheated and failed, the vehicle would become a runaway projectile on a road with no escape. Making it to the wide safety of Broken Break Point meant survival. The ritual was always the same. Stop. Let the screaming, smoking vehicle cool. Then, if necessary, replace the damaged brakes right there, leaving the exhausted parts on the growing pile as an offering to the mountain. By day, the point is silent save for the wind. Tourists sometimes wander among the metal debris, reading faded stickers on the rusted rotors, each one a story of a crisis averted. But as night falls and the traffic ceases, a low grinding begins to echo across the pass. It is the sound of metal on metal under tremendous stress, a wrenching, shrieking groan that seems to come from the very cliffs. It rises and falls, sometimes building to a piercing squeal that hangs in the cold air before fading back into a menacing rumble. Some say they hear screaming mixed with the metal noise. Those who have camped near the point, often adventurers seeking the thrill of the eerie, report more than just mechanical sounds. They describe a human element woven into the cacophony. A distant, strained cry that matches the pitch of the grinding. A shout that seems to rise and then be abruptly cut off. It is never clear, never a word, but universally described as a sound of pure alarm. These accounts are consistent enough that paranormal investigators and acoustic engineers have both made pilgrimages to the site. A retired long-haul driver named Ben Wallace offers a perspective. He survived a near-catastrophic brake failure on this pass 30 years ago. He speaks not of ghosts, but of imprint. That kind of raw, potent human emotion, he believes, does not just vanish. Combined with the physical scarring of the road itself from thousands of overheated brakes, and the mountain's natural acoustics, it creates a kind of recording. The grinding is the sound of the road remembering every skid and shudder. Scientific surveys have yielded intriguing, if inconclusive, data. The particular mineral composition of the cliff face is highly resonant, acting as a natural sound amplifier. Wind funneling through the narrow pass at night can create harmonic vibrations, especially as it passes over the vast piles of scored and grooved metal. An acoustic researcher noted that the specific arrangement of the brake piles could theoretically function as a rudimentary Aeolian instrument, with the night wind as its player. The human brain, wired to find patterns, might then assemble these disparate sounds into something recognizable, something emotional. Today, a modern bypass tunnel has been built, siphoning the majority of heavy traffic away from the old pass. But the sounds have not ceased. If anything, they feel more pronounced in the newfound silence. People still come, equipped with recorders and a respectful curiosity. They wait in the dark, listening. The grinding starts, as it always does. A deep, metallic protest from the heart of the mountain. And if you listen closely, with a patient ear, you might detect it. Not a clear voice, but a texture within the noise, a frayed edge of panic that was worn into this place over countless trips down the mountain. It is not a haunting of a person, but of a moment. The moment between control and catastrophe, frozen in sound and scattered rust, forever playing out on the cold, empty stage of broken break point. It serves as a solemn auditory monument to the fragility of safety. And to the profound, lingering echo of human fear. Pressed into the landscape. On a forgotten spur of track that disappears into a pine forest, there sits a single, solitary boxcar. It is an old wooden-sided car, its red paint faded to a dusty rose, its company logo illegible. Weeds grow tall between the rails that lead to it. And the forest has begun to gently envelop its wheels. This is still Boxcar Spur. The car has not moved in living memory, a permanent, decaying fixture on a track that goes nowhere. Its door is sealed, a heavy, sliding panel of worn wood and rusted iron. The phenomenon begins with movement. At irregular intervals, most often on moonless nights, the Boxcara's door begins to slide open. It does not jerk or rattle, but moves with a slow, grinding inevitability, as if pushed by an unseen hand from within. The sound is a low, wooden groan that cuts through the nocturnal silence of the woods. The door opens just enough to reveal a slice of profound darkness inside, a blackness that seems denser than the natural night. From that opening, a wave of cold air pours forth. This is not the coolness of shade or night, but a deep, wintry chill. That causes the moisture in the warm summer air to condense into a faint, rolling mist. This cold front carries with it the second part of the phenomenon. Whispered voices. They are not one voice, but many, a tangled murmur of hushed conversation. The tones are varied, some weary, some anxious, some soft with despair or confusion. The language is indistinct, the words blurred together by time and cold. The human cadence is unmistakable. The phenomenon is a chilling echo of human presence. The chill is a reminder of the unknown. It is the sound of many people speaking quietly in close quarters. The cold and the whispers last for several minutes, spilling from the open door and spilling into the still forest. Then, as silently as it opened, the door grinds shut again, sealing the boxcar once more. The temperature normalizes, the whispers fade, and only the silent, rusting sentinel remains. The history of this spur is a shadowy one. Local archives suggest it was a temporary loading point for a lumber operation that closed nearly a century ago. But deeper, more persistent stories tell a different tale. During a period of great displacement, when families were on the move seeking any hope of work, this remote spur was sometimes used as an unofficial stop. People without tickets, traveling in desperate, improvised ways, would be discreetly let off here to avoid station masters. The boxcar, according to these oral histories, was occasionally used as a temporary shelter, a dry, if freezing, place to spend a night in the vast, unfamiliar woods before moving on at dawn. It was a waypoint for the invisible, a holding cell for hope and fear. The Dora's autonomous movement defies simple mechanics. The track is level, and the Dora's mechanism is seized with rust. Investigators have placed sensors and cameras, confirming the movement but finding no cause. No animal is large enough to trigger it, no wind is consistent enough to push it. The cold is equally puzzling. Thermal scans show the interior of the car is indeed significantly colder than its surroundings, a differential that cannot be explained by insulation or shade. The whispered voices, when captured on highly sensitive directional microphones, present a spectral puzzle. The audio contains the phonetic contours of speech, but no identifiable words, as if the meaning has been stripped away by time, leaving only the emotional essence of communication. As if the meaning has been stripped away by time, leaving only the emotional essence of communication. Leaving only the emotional essence of communication. Leaving only the emotional essence of communication. To visit still Boxcar Spur is to confront a profound loneliness. The isolated car seems less like an object and more like a vessel. When the door begins its slow slide, the feeling is not of a haunting, but of a release. The cold air is a breath held for decades, finally exhaled. The whispers are not directed at the listener, they are the lingering echo of private conversations, of plans made in uncertainty, of comforts offered in the dark, of tears shed silently on a cold wooden floor. They are the residual sound of human resilience and suffering, trapped in a space that served as a brief sanctuary. The boxcar does not threaten. It remembers. It periodically opens its memory to the night, letting the forest hear the echoes of its temporary tenants. The ones who passed through without leaving a physical trace. It is a monument to transience. A still point on a forgotten line. That holds within its weathered walls the chill and the murmur of countless forgotten journeys. A frozen breath of history that still whispers on the wind. On a stretch of prairie highway so long and straight the horizon seems to curve. There is a place known as the Prairie Signal Stop. It is not a town, nor even a true intersection. It is simply a single, rusted railroad crossing signal. Standing sentinel over a pair of tracks that have not seen a train in over 30 years. The metal arms that once descended are frozen in the upright position, their red paint faded to a dusty pink by the relentless sun. The control box is a gutted shell, its wires long since severed and carried off by scavengers. But as the sun dips below the prairie rim and the first stars prick the vast, violet sky, a change occurs. The signal light, a single, round lens caked with the dust of 1,000 passing vehicles. It is a deep, pulsing red. It flashes with a slow, steady rhythm, casting a bloody, rhythmic light across the cracked asphalt and the dry grass of the ditch. There is no hum of transformers, no click of relays. The light simply exists, an impossible ember burning in the twilight. For most drivers, this is a curious anomaly, a trick of the fading light perhaps. They slow, as one does at a railroad crossing, even an abandoned one. They look both ways down the empty, silent tracks that stretch into the darkness, and seeing nothing, they proceed. It is in the act of crossing, of deliberately ignoring the warning of the dead signal, that the phenomenon reveals its true nature. Those who drive across the tracks while the red light flashes report a sudden, overwhelming physical reaction. This is quickly followed by a wave of nausea, a dizziness. That makes the straight road seem to waver. The feeling is intense, visceral, and utterly real. It is not a hallucination, but a profound physiological response. As if the body itself is sounding an alarm that the mind has chosen to disregard. The sensation lasts only as long as it takes to clear the crossing, fading gradually over the next 100 yards. Leaving behind a shaky unease and a cold sweat. The history of this crossing is one of quiet tragedy. Railroad company archives note it was the site of a fatal collision in the late 1960s, between a car and a late-running freight train. The details are sparse, but the report concludes the signal was functioning correctly. The driver of the car, a local farmer named Arlen Goss, was killed instantly. Witnesses from a nearby farmhouse stated they saw his car approach the crossing. They saw the red signal flashing. They saw him slow, then, inexplicably, accelerate onto the tracks just as the train emerged from a shallow dip. It was ruled an accident, a tragic misjudgment, but the question of why he went, when the warning was so clear, lingered in the community. This event provides the cornerstone for understanding the phenomenon. Its function was to warn. The flashing red light that appears is not a ghostly replay. It is the idea of the warning, made visible. The physical sickness experienced by those who ignore it is interpreted as a form of empathetic feedback. It is the crossing enforcing its purpose. If you will not heed the visual signal, it communicates through a deeper, more primal language of the body. Dread and nausea, the human body's instinctive reactions to imminent, unseen danger. It is not a punishment, but a desperate, amplified attempt to communicate the consequence that is etched into the very soil of the crossing. To approach the prairie signal stop after dark is to be presented with a philosophical test. Do you obey a warning from a machine that has no power? The light is a ghost of a function, a memory of duty. To disregard it is to feel, just for a moment, the terrifying weight of Arlen Goss's final, inexplicable decision, translated into a surge of primal fear. The lesson here is about heeding echoes. The crossing is haunted not by a person, but by an action and its consequence. The flashing red light is a plea from history, a desperate repetition of a signal that once failed to prevent a disaster. It asks not for remembrance, but for obedience, forcing those who encounter it to choose whether to respect a warning from the past, or to risk carrying with them, if only for a few sickening seconds, the ghost of a terrible mistake. In the industrial outskirts of a forgotten town, where weeds push through cracked concrete, a single piece of railroad infrastructure remains, stubbornly refusing to be reclaimed. It is known locally as the dead switch track. The rails leading to and from the switch are severed, ending abruptly in tangles of brush. The switch itself, a heavy, iron mechanism designed to divert trains from one track to another, sits frozen in place, its lever seized with corrosion. It no longer connects to anything functional. It is a junction to nowhere. By day, it is a melancholy relic for urban explorers and a curiosity for history buffs. The air is still, the only sounds coming from distant traffic. But as the sun sets and the industrial yard empties, the atmosphere around the switch undergoes a subtle shift. The temperature seems to drop a few degrees, and a profound stillness settles in, a silence that feels heavy and attentive. Then, the sounds begin. They start after full dark, rarely before. It is the sharp, metallic click of a latch engaging. The solid, weighty snap of the switch points throwing from one position to the other. The sounds are clean, mechanical, and precise, as if the mechanism is being operated with expert care. They repeat in no discernible pattern. Sometimes minutes apart, sometimes in rapid succession. Click, and then a long pause. Snap, click, snap. It is the sound of work being done, of decisions being made on a track that leads only to rust and weeds. Those who have ventured close to the switch at night report more than just the sounds. They speak of an intense, specific feeling of being observed. It is not a vague unease, but a focused attention, as palpable as a spotlight. The feeling emanates from the switch itself, a cold, judging scrutiny that tracks every slight movement. Most feel a compelling urge to step back, to retreat from the invisible gaze. The few who have resisted that urge describe a mounting pressure, a sense of profound trespass, as if they are standing in the exact spot where a critical, endless task is being performed. A railway historian named Marcus became fixated on the dead switch track. His interest was in the engineering, the specific model of switch and its place in regional rail history. He dismissed the local stories as urban legend, the sounds as the product of contracting metal or animal activity. To prove his point, he decided to conduct a nighttime survey, to record the ambient sounds and prove there was nothing supernatural at work. He arrived at dusk with his recording equipment. As night fell, the first click echoed through the empty yard. It was unmistakably metallic, and it came from within the switch housing itself. Marcus felt a jolt of surprise, but activated his recorder. The sounds continued. Click. Snap. They were too sharp, too isolated to be random thermal contraction. He moved closer, his flashlight beam playing over the rusted lever. That is when the feeling began. It started as a prickle on the back of his neck, an instinctual alertness. It grew into a solid, unwavering certainty that he was not just heard, but seen. The attention felt old, and impatient. It did not feel human, but it felt intelligent. It was the awareness of a machine that has one purpose, and a living thing standing in its way. His heart began to pound, not with terror, but with a deep, professional shame, as if he had interrupted a master craftsman at a delicate task. He forced himself to look at the switch points. In the beam of his flashlight, they were solidly, immovably fused with rust. They had not moved an inch. Yet the sound of their movement, the clear audio of steel on steel, had just echoed in his ears. He understood. He was not hearing a ghost. He was hearing the ghost of a function. Marcus packed his gear slowly and left. The next day, he visited the local historical society. He found no tales of tragedy, no story of a switchman killed on duty. Instead, he found payroll records. For over 70 years, a man named Samuel Gibbs had worked this junction. His job was meticulous, his record flawless. He had thrown this switch for thousands of trains, in rain, snow, and darkness, without a single error. His identity was his precision. The switch was his instrument. When it was decommissioned, Samuel had fought the decision, arguing that a backup line was necessary. He lost. The feeling at the switch, Marcus now believes, is not Samuel, but the residual focus of a man who poured his entire concentration into a single, vital action. The clicking and snapping is the echo of that perfected skill, a pattern of duty so deeply ingrained it repeats into the void. The watchfulness is the ingrained habit of a man who knew that distraction meant catastrophe, that every moment near the switch required absolute attention. Marcus never published his recording. Some echoes are not meant to be captured. He now sees the dead switch track not as a haunted place, but as a monument to expertise. The sounds are a memory of flawless performance. The feeling of being watched is the lingering shadow of a professional's concentration. Still guarding a junction that the world has forgotten. Ensuring that even in total abandonment, the job is still being done. With the same unwavering, mechanical perfection. On a forgotten spur of railway, deep in the agricultural heartland, lies a place called Grain Ghost Siding. It is a cemetery of commerce, a final stop that became permanent. Dozens of battered, rust-colored hopper cars sit abandoned on buckling tracks, their metal sides peeling away like old bark. From these gaping wounds, a silent avalanche has poured forth. Rotting grain spills from broken cars, forming great golden-gray mounds that have settled and hardened into strange, lumpen hills. Wheat, corn, and milo, once destined to feed a nation, now molders under the sun, reclaimed by insects and weeds. By day, the siding is a study in stillness and decay. The air is thick with the scent of fermentation and damp earth, a sour, sweet odor that clings to the back of the throat. Cattails grow through the spilled harvest, and birds pick at the kernels. The silence is profound, broken only by the creak of hot metal and the distant call of a hawk. It is a monument to some forgotten logistical disaster, a train that was simply left and never moved, its purpose eroded by time and bankruptcy. But as the sun dips below the flat horizon, a change occurs. The smell, that constant daytime odor, undergoes a subtle transformation. It returns at night with a different character. The smell, that constant daytime odor, undergoes a subtle transformation. It is the clean smell of a full harvest bin, of a working elevator, of productivity. This impossible scent rolls across the siding in waves, contradicting the visible decay with a powerful olfactory memory of abundance. And then, there is the dust. On windless nights, fine clouds of it begin to stir around the base of the hopper cars. They rise in gentle plumes, catching the weak light of the moon or the distant glow of a farmhouse security lamp. Within these nebulous clouds, observers report shapes. They seem to shuffle slowly between the cars, as if performing a slow, weary inspection. The soft, dry cough is a constant soundtrack, a sound of irritation from lungs filled with chaff. A local historian named Anya Vance has spent years researching the siding. Her records show it was part of a short-line railroad that went bankrupt abruptly over 40 years ago. A final train, fully loaded, was shunted onto this spur and simply forgotten in the legal chaos. The crew, she learned, was a tight-knit group of 5 men, known for their efficiency and their dedication to moving the harvest. They were reassigned, the company dissolved, and the train, along with its cargo, slipped from memory. Anya's theory is not one of haunting in a traditional sense. She speaks of residue. The collective focus of those men, their daily routines of checking seals, monitoring loads, and battling the ever-present grain dust, was imprinted on this place. The scent of fresh grain is the memory of their cargo in its prime. The figures are an echo of their final, routine walk-around, an action performed so often it became part of the Sidings environment. The coughs are the most personal remnant, a universal symptom of their trade, lingering like a phantom ache. Scientists who have visited suggest environmental explanations. They point to the unique process of decomposition in such a vast, contained organic mass, which can release different chemical compounds at night as temperatures drop. The dust, they note, could be stirred by subtle thermal currents rising from the warmer metal of the cars into the cool night air, creating the illusion of movement. Yet, they concede the specificity of the sensory experiencia, the precise smell of fresh grain, the rhythmic coughing is challenging to explain through chemistry and physics alone. The siding has become an unlikely destination for a certain kind of quiet tourism. Visitors come at dusk, standing at a respectful distance from the tracks. They wait as the world darkens. First, the change in the air arrives, that inexplicable shift from rot to richness. Then, the dust begins to dance. If you look with peripheral vision, without staring directly, you might perceive the gentle, laborious movement. And you will almost certainly hear either the faint, dry, repetitive cough, a sound that speaks of hard work and forgotten care. Grain Ghost Siding is not a place of terror, but of profound melancholy. It is a pocket where a specific kind of labor has left its fingerprint on the world. The rotting grain is the reality. The smell and the shapes are the memory of purpose, a spectral blueprint of the work that once was. It reminds us that places absorb not just events, but routines. The echoes left behind are not of a single dramatic moment, but of the 1,000 ordinary moments that came before either the dust, the weight, the cough, and the quiet satisfaction of a job that, for a brief time, fed the world. For a brief time, fed the world. On the old coastal line, where the tracks curve sharply around a sheer granite bluff, there is a place known as Whistle Bend. The geography here is acoustically peculiar. The curved rock face acts as a natural amphitheater, capturing and amplifying any sound produced on the tracks. A dropped tool, a spoken word, even footsteps on the gravel, are thrown back in a faint, lingering echo. By day, this is merely a curiosity, a quirk of geology noticed by maintenance crews. But after midnight, this natural soundstage hosts a solitary, endless performance. It begins subtly, a faint, mournful tone that seems to condense from the damp night air itself. It grows into the clear, unmistakable blast of a steam train whistle. The sound is immense, filling the entire bowl of the landscape, vibrating in the chest of anyone who hears it. Yet, it possesses a terrifying, paradoxical quality. The whistle echoes, but it does not fade. It does not approach, recede, or pass by. It is a sound forever arriving, yet never coming any closer. Listeners describe a profound sense of expectation that curdles into unease. The unchanging volume and proximity of the sound create a cognitive dissonance that is deeply unsettling. You find yourself staring down the tracks, expecting to see a headlamp pierce the darkness. But the twin rails remain empty, gleaming dully under the moon, stretching into a silent, unbroken line. The whistle can last for minutes, or for over an hour, before it finally dissolves, not into distance, but into a sudden, absolute silence that feels heavier than before. The bend has a history as sharp as its curve. In the golden age of the coastal express, this was a notorious blind spot. Engineers were instructed to sound their whistles well in advance as a warning. The legend centers on the night the Pacific Noon, a fast passenger train, encountered a landslide that had partially covered the tracks just beyond the curve. The engineer, a meticulous man named Arlen Shaw, saw the debris too late. He slammed the brakes and held down the whistle in a continuous, desperate warning to his crew and to any possible workers ahead. The train left the rails, carving a scar into the hillside that is still visible today. The whistle, it is said, was the last sound heard before the impact, a sustained cry cut abruptly short. After the wreck was cleared and the line repaired, strange reports began. Signalmen in the nearby tower would hear the whistle on clear nights when no train was scheduled. At first, it was dismissed as an echo from a far-off train on a different line. But the consistency was troubling. The whistle always sounded at the same perceived distance, with the same haunting timbre. The bend was eventually fitted with automated warning lights, rendering the ritual whistle obsolete for real trains. Yet, the phantom signal continued. Modern acoustic surveys of whistle bend confirm its amplifying properties, but deepen the mystery. Sophisticated recording equipment has captured the sound. Analysis reveals it is not a simple loop or a recording. It is a living sound wave, with subtle variations in pitch and timbre. Exactly as a real steam whistle would have. There is no point of origin that microphones can triangulate. The sound manifests within the acoustic chamber of the bend itself. As if the rock is remembering and reproducing the vibration that saturated it on that one terrible night. To stand at Whistle Bend after midnight is to be caught in a sonic limbo. The world reduces to the cold steel of the rails, the dark mass of the bluff, and that unwavering, mournful cry. It is not a warning of an approaching train, but a memorial to a moment that never ended. It is the sound of anticipation frozen in time, of a crisis perpetually announced but never resolved. The engineer's final act, his sustained plea into the darkness, was etched so deeply into the stone and the air. A permanent echo of a warning that came too late. A signal from a train that will never again arrive. Eternally suspended in the bend of the tracks and the bend of time. At the end of a forgotten spur line, where the rails are swallowed by a thicket of young birch trees. The tracks here are old, the iron oxidized to a dull brown. The wooden ties soft with decay. The spur served a single, long-vanished lumber mill. And when the mill closed, the track was abandoned. Nature has been reclaiming it ever since. But one feature remains stark and unnatural amidst the creeping green. On a straight, level section, one of the steel rails is broken. It is not merely bent or warped. It is cracked clean through, the fracture a sharp, jagged line across the top of the rail. The two ends have not even separated, held in near-perfect alignment by the rusted spikes and the rotten tie beneath. It is a frozen moment of catastrophic failure, preserved in iron and rust. The air here is often still, heavy with the scent of damp wood and cold metal. Visitors who walk this spur line, drawn by the eerie perfection of the break, often experience the same auditory sequence. It begins when they are standing near the fracture. First, comes the sound of wheels. It is not the distant rumble of a modern train, but the distinct, rhythmic clatter of iron wheels on jointed rail, the specific sound of an old, slow-moving freight car. The sound grows nearer, clearer. Then, a sharp, metallic screech, the terrible sound of metal wrenching against metal. The terrible sound of metal wrenching against metal. This is the sound of wheels leaving the track. This screech is immediately followed by the crash. It is the sound of irreparable damage. And then, absolute silence. Not the gentle quiet of the woods, but a profound, deafening void, as if the world itself is holding its breath. The transition is jarring, from catastrophic noise to a stillness so complete it presses on the eardrums. This silence lasts for a long minute, often broken only by the frantic beating of the visitor's own heart. No birds call. No leaves rustle. The world feels empty, shocked. Railroad archives contain a brief, grim entry for this spur. In the winter of 1951, a single locomotive and 2 flat cars were making a final run to retrieve the last of the mill's equipment. The crew was small, just an engineer and a brakeman. A subsequent inspection found the fractured rail, likely caused by an undetected flaw in the steel and exacerbated by the deep cold. The official report states the locomotive derailed at the break. The engineer was killed instantly. The brakeman, thrown clear, survived with severe injuries. He reported hearing the shriek of the metal. The world turning over. And then a silence so deep he thought he had gone deaf. Before the pain arrived. This historical incident is the seed of the phenomenon. Resonating with the memory of that specific frequency of destruction. The experience is not a random ghost sound. It is a precise playback of the disaster's key moments, culminating in the shocked silence that followed the impact, a silence more haunting than any scream. By standing near it, a visitor inadvertently steps into the sensorium of that long-ago second. To visit the split rail spur is to stand at the epicenter of a single, frozen second of violence. The sounds are not a warning, for the event has already happened. They are a memorial written in noise. The progression is a brutal education in cause and effect, the crack, the jump, the crash. And the terrible, empty aftermath. The lesson is one of latent failure and sudden consequence. The rail held until it didn't. The journey was routine until it wasn't. The spur reminds us that some fractures are permanent. And that certain places are condemned to repeat their worst moment. Not in image, but in sound. Sharing the terrible physics of their history with anyone who comes to stand quietly by the break. And listen. The end. In the deep folds of the river valley, where the main rail line curves sharply to avoid the old bluffs, there lies a long, straight stretch of track known as the Midnight Freight Stop. It is a passing siding, a place where trains could pull over to allow others to pass. For nearly a century, it served a crucial, quiet purpose, handling the relentless flow of overnight freight while the world above the canyon rim slept. The trains stopped coming years ago. The tracks are still there, but now they are silent, their steel dulled by rust and rain. By day, the siding is simply a lonely place. The gravel is thick with weeds, and the old signal post leans at a tired angle. But if you stand there as twilight deepens, a subtle change occurs. The air grows denser, seeming to hold the memory of diesel and cold iron. A profound stillness descends, but it is not an empty stillness. It is the quiet of anticipation, of held breath. Then, as full night claims the valley, the activity begins. The long stretch of gravel between the rails, empty to the naked eye, seems to be occupied. Dark, rectangular voids form in the air, blocking out the starlight and the faint glow from the distant town. These are the shadows of boxcars, of flatbeds, of tankers. They sit silently on the tracks, a phantom train of immense length and weight. Between these invisible cars, other shadows move. They are low and swift, the silhouettes of men at work. They dart from one dark space to another, their movements purposeful and hurried. The faint, almost inaudible, scrape of a boot on gravel, the soft thud of a hand against a wooden crate that isn't there, the muted clank of a coupling that exists only as a memory of sound. And then, the lights. They appear suddenly, points of warm, yellow flame bobbing gently at waist height. These lantern lights sway with the rhythm of a walking pace, moving down the impossible length of the invisible train. They are not held aloft, but carried low, like a worker checking undercarriages or examining wheels. These lantern lights illuminate nothing of the ground, but their glow gives shape to the deeper darkness around them, hinting at legs, at toolboxes, at the lower edges of the phantom freight cars. A photographer named Anya sought out the siding after hearing fragments of the story. She wanted to capture the emptiness, the decay of industry. She arrived in the late afternoon and waited, her camera on a tripod, determined to document the transition from dusk to night. As the phenomenon began, she saw nothing through her viewfinder. The long exposure showed only still tracks and star trails. But her own eyes witnessed the shifting blocks of darkness, the darting figures, the swaying lanterns that left no trace on her sensor. A profound sense of being an intruder washed over her. This was not a haunting of tragedy, but of routine. The shadows were not lost souls, they were shift workers. The lanterns were not signals of distress, but tools of the trade. She felt the urgent, focused energy of a job that must be finished before dawn. Of a schedule that waits for no one, not even the end of its own relevance. She left her equipment and walked slowly, respectfully, along the verge, far from the tracks. As she did, one of the low-swinging lanterns paused. Its light seemed to turn toward her, not with menace, but with a kind of brisk acknowledgement, a brief assessment of a non-threat, before it continued on its path down the line. In that moment, Anya understood. She was not watching ghosts. She was watching an echo of labor. Research in the town library the next day confirmed it. The midnight freight stop was more than a siding. It was a critical choke point. Delays here rippled across the entire regional network. The night crews who worked here were legends for their speed and efficiency. Operating in near total darkness, their world defined by the circle of light from their lanterns. The urgent calls of their foreman echoed through the night. The pressure was immense, the margin for error, zero. When the line closed, that pressure did not dissipate. It soaked into the gravel, into the steel, into the very air of the siding. The phenomenon is not a replay of a single night, but a condensation of tens of thousands of nights. The moving shadows are the enduring imprint of skilled, relentless work. The lanterns are the memory of the light that made that work possible. Anya never published the photos from that night. They showed nothing but darkness. Some histories are written in absence, not in light. She now knows why the old rail workers in the town's diner speak of the siding with a gruff respect, but never with fear. They hear the industry of their past still humming in the dark. The midnight freight stop is not abandoned. It is still in operation, running the most important schedule of all, the perpetual one. The train that never arrives, worked by the crew that never leaves, ensuring the forgotten freight of memory is always, faithfully, on the move. The track through the Black Spruce Valley has many names. The old-timers on the railway call it Cold Steel Crossing. Even at the height of July, when the sun bakes the gravel bed, the twin rails here hold a permanent chill. They gleam with a frosty light, a line of captured winter laid across a green and living world. It is a place of quiet contradiction, where the laws of nature seem softly suspended. For those who work this remote route, the crossing is a known event. They feel the temperature drop as the locomotive enters the sector. A sudden, sharp plunge, like entering a walk-in freezer. Breath fogs instantly in the cab. Windows develop a thin, persistent haze. Conductors making the necessary walk along the stopped train speak of oppressing silence. The dense, muffled quiet of deep snow, despite the summer hum of insects in the nearby trees. Some report a sensation of movement at the edge of their vision, a shifting of shadows between the cars that holds no substance. Most common is the feeling of touch. A subtle, unmistakable pressure against a sleeve or coat shoulder, as if someone had gently brushed past in a crowded room. Yet there is never anyone there. Just the silent pine, the cold steel, and the vast, empty sky. The official records are dry and technical. They note a minor, unexplained temperature gradient. They recommend proper insulation for crew clothing. The stories, however, are passed down quietly, from veteran to rookie, over coffee in distant depots. There is the tale of a surveyor in the early days, a man mapping the route through the valley. His journal, archived and mostly forgotten, describes finding the perfect path, a natural grade along the river. His final entry, dated the day before he vanished, mentions a helpful guide who showed him the way, a man in old-fashioned work clothes who never spoke, but whose hand felt like ice when they shook. A century later, a brakeman named Leo was checking couplings on a stalled freight in the dead of a summer night. His lantern light reflected off the frigid rails, creating tunnels of light in the mist of his own breath. He felt a hand on his back, firm and cold, pushing him away from the wheels just as a delayed slack action jolted through the train. The empty space where he had been standing clanged shut with tremendous force. When he turned, heart hammering, there. Science continues to offer its theories. Some speak of piezoelectric effects, where pressure on the quartz in the bedrock generates a weak electric field and localized cooling. Others suggest a trick of acoustics, where the shape of the valley funnels and dampens sound into an eerie pocket. They are plausible, logical explanations for the cold and the silence. Yet they do not explain the touch. The brush of a hand. The guiding push. The shared, unspoken belief among crews that they are not alone on that stretch of track. That someone, or something, maintains a watchful, chilly vigil. Perhaps it is a memory held in the metal, a resonant echo of the countless souls who built this line. Through unforgiving wilderness. Their labor, their sweat, and sometimes their lives. Embedded into the very iron. A permanent record of endeavor and sacrifice. That manifests as a pocket of perpetual winter. Or perhaps it is a guardian, a presence born of the rails themselves, an instinct to protect the line and those who work upon it. A cold sentinel ensuring safe passage, its only language a shiver down the spine, its only touch a warning or a rescue, frozen in time. The trains still run. They slow slightly, as per procedure, for the peculiar thermal zone. Engineers feel the familiar drop in temperature, watch their breath cloud the air. They glance at the empty conductor's seat, or out at the deserted right-of-way, and they offer a silent, professional nod. For at Cold Steel Crossing, the rails are always icy. The air is still and cold. And some, as they pass, still feel the gentle, frosty brush of a hand against their coat, a timeless reminder that this path through the wilderness was earned, and is not entirely forgotten. At a lonely rural crossroads, where two gravel roads meet under a vast sky. Where two gravel roads meet under a vast sky, stands a single, weathered wooden post. Nailed to this post is a collection of faded papers, protected somewhat by a rusted tin hood. These are the timetables for a bus line that ceased operation decades ago. They list destinations that no longer exist, and times based on a forgotten rhythm of life. This is Lost Timetable Point. To the casual passerby, it is a quaint relic, a piece of nostalgia. But for those who pause, it becomes something else entirely. The phenomenon is subtle, and requires a specific kind of attention. A visitor might glance at the schedules, note the printed arrival and departure times for the old Blue River Line. And then look away to watch a cloud or consult their phone. When they look back, the times have changed. The 2:15 p.m. arrival to Mill Creek might now read 2:47 p.m. The 8:05 a.m. departure for the junction might shift to 7:58 a.m. The changes are never dramatic, just a few minutes here and there, as if the schedule is being gently, constantly recalibrated by an unseen conductor. The paper itself shows no signs of being altered, no fresh ink, no smudging. The new numbers appear as aged and faded as the originals, as if they have always been there. Those who linger, attempting to document these shifts, report a growing sense of internal disorientation. This escalates into a profound feeling of temporal slippage. Watches seem to stutter, the movement of the sun across the sky feels inconsistent. And minutes can feel like hours or pass in an instant. The world becomes unnervingly fluid. People describe a desperate need to leave the crossroads, to re-anchor themselves in the predictable flow of time by getting into their cars and driving away. To re-anchor themselves in the predictable flow of time by getting into their cars and driving away. Once they depart, the feeling gradually recedes, leaving behind only a lingering unease and a fractured memory of the elapsed time. The history of this place is one of pivotal waiting. Before the bus line, it was a stagecoach stop. Later, it became the sole pickup point for children going to the consolidated school. For farmers heading to the distant grain market. For sweethearts meeting for a date. For generations, lives were structured around the times posted on this board. It was more than a schedule, it was a communal clock, a promise that the wider world would connect with this isolated spot at a specific hour. When the service was cancelled, a piece of the local rhythm died. But the need for that connection, the collective anticipation of arrivals and the melancholy of departures, seems to have remained imprinted on the location. Scientific investigation has proven frustrating. Time-lapse cameras aimed at the post have malfunctioned, their digital timestamps glitching. Analog cameras have captured the schedules, but the film, when developed, shows blurring around the numbers that analysts cannot definitively label as motion blur or something else. Attempts to remove the papers for study have been met with a strange resistance, as if they are held by more than rusted nails, and those who have tried were overcome with such severe vertigo they could not proceed. Psychologists suggest the disorientation is a form of environmental suggestion, a powerful psychological response to the suggestion of shifting time. Yet, this does not explain the multiple, independent witnesses who report identical numerical changes. Or the fact that the changes are never to impossible times, but always to logically plausible ones for a bus schedule. To visit lost timetable point is to engage with a ghost of routine. The posted times are not haunted by people, but by punctuality itself. By the collective human energy of waiting and expecting. The crossroads are quiet, the roads empty. But the post stands as a focal point for temporal instability. It is as if all the minutes spent glancing down the road. All the impatient sighs. All the joyful waves of greeting. Have accumulated here. They have given the place a kind of agency over time. A desire to keep adjusting the schedule. To keep the possibility of connection alive. To never settle on a final fixed moment of abandonment. The disorientation felt is the sensation of that collective waiting pulling at the edges of now, trying to reweave itself into the present. It is a place that refuses to accept that the last bus has come and gone, endlessly tweaking its promises in the faint, forlorn hope that someone, or something, might yet arrive on time. Deep in a pine forest, where the light falls in long, dusty shafts, an old railroad spur lies sleeping. This is the Echo Nail Spur. It was once a service line for a remote logging camp, a vein for timber now grown over. The rails are still there, though coated in a patina of rust. The wooden ties are weathered silver, and along their length, scattered like iron seeds, lie dozens of loose railroad spikes. They are not piled, but individually placed, as if dropped carefully beside the very holes they once filled. They rest on the gravel, on the moss, never rusting into the earth, always clean and visible against the forest floor. The spur is a place of deep quiet by day. But as night falls, and the forest transitions from birdsong to insect hum. Then another. Soon, the clear, sharp report of a hammer striking steel rings out through the trees. It is not a frantic pounding. It is the measured, rhythmic work of a professional. 3 firm strikes, a pause just long enough to reposition the spike, then 3 more. The sound carries a distinct echo, bouncing off the dense ranks of pine trunks, making it impossible to locate its source. It seems to come from everywhere and nowhere, a phantom percussion section in the dark. What is most compelling is the rhythm itself. It is not random noise. It has the cadence of a living, breathing worker. The pace is steady, but not mechanical. You can hear the slight hesitation of a hand finding its grip. The focused exertion of a shoulder driving the blow. The brief rest between sequences. It is the sound of a task being performed with skill and patience. If you listen closely, you can almost map the unseen laborer's progress down the line, the hammering moving incrementally along the track, one tie at a time, before eventually fading into silence as if the worker has taken a break, or moved around a bend in the track you cannot see. The history of this spur is one of solitary toil. Company payroll records indicate that in its final years of operation, maintenance was handled by a single man, a section hand named Silas Rourke. He was known as a quiet, meticulous worker, a man who took immense pride in the integrity of his track. His job was to walk the line daily, checking for loose spikes, softening ties, or any sign of wear. He would carry his spike maul and a pouch of new spikes, making repairs as he went. The camp foreman's notes describe Rourke as a creature of rhythm, his hammer blows as reliable as a heartbeat. When the camp closed, Silas was the last to leave, reportedly making one final, unnecessary walk down the spur to ensure it was sound for a train that would never come again. Silas Rourke's life was defined by a repetitive, focused action, performed day after day in isolation. The intensity of that habitual labor, the sheer volume of concentrated energy spent on that single task, may have imprinted itself upon the location. The loose spikes are the visual cue, the stage dressing for the memory. The hammering is the performance itself. The rhythm is the ghost, not of a man, but of his work. Acoustic researchers point to the unique environment. The dense pine forest acts as a natural sound chamber, trapping and reflecting specific frequencies. The iron of the rails and spikes may also serve as a conduit for vibrational memory. Together, they create the perfect conditions for replaying a sound that was as much a part of the ecosystem as the wind in the needles. To stand on the Echo Nail Spur at night is to be an audience of one for a private concert of industry. There is no fear, only a profound sense of observation. You are listening to a man's purpose. The hammering does not respond to calls or lights. It is entirely self-contained, a loop of dedicated effort. It speaks to the dignity of routine, the kind of work that becomes so ingrained it transcends the worker. The lesson of the Echo Nail Spur is one of enduring craft. Some forms of haunting are not about tragedy, but about devotion. The sound that echoes through the pines is a testament to a job well done, repeated forever in the medium of memory and metal. It reminds us that the most powerful echoes are not always of voices, but of actions. Of the steady, reliable rhythm of hands that cared for something, long after the reason for that care has vanished into the quiet of the woods. At the very end of a rusted spur line, where the track is swallowed by tall prairie grass, there is a place marked only by memory and weathered timbers. This is the empty caboose track. For decades, it was the designated parking spot for the red caboose of the local freight train, a bright punctuation mark at the end of miles of gray steel. The caboose itself is long gone, sold for scrap or maybe turned into a quaint diner somewhere far away. All that remains are 4 heavy wooden blocks, set precisely on the gravel, where its wheels once rested. The air here, however, has not forgotten. On still afternoons, and especially in the hour just before sunset, a distinct scent hangs in the breeze. No machinery operates nearby, no fires burn. It is a phantom smell, a sensory memory that arrives unbidden and lingers like a sigh. But it is after dark that the track reveals its more intimate mystery. When the wind dies down and the stars emerge, sounds drift from the space defined by those 4 wooden blocks. They are the sounds of camaraderie, of a shared, rolling home. The soft clink of a porcelain coffee cup on a metal surface. And most distinctly, laughter. It is not loud or raucous, but a gentle, weary chuckle, the kind shared after a long shift, or a quiet, contented laugh between friends enjoying a moment of peace. A sound engineer named Leo heard about this place from an old railwayman in a distant city. Intrigued by the idea of auditory residue, he traveled to the site with sensitive microphones and recorders. He was a skeptic, believing the stories were woven from wishful thinking and the power of suggestion. He set up his equipment at a respectful distance as the sun began to set. The smell reached him first. It was the smell of a working train, of heat and friction and industry. He noted it with clinical interest. As true darkness fell, his microphones, capable of capturing whispers from 100 yards away, registered nothing but the natural sounds of insects and rustling grass. But his own ears told a different story. He heard the laughter. It was faint, as if coming from behind a thick wall, but its character was clear. It was a warm sound, punctuated by a brief, muffled phrase and then another chuckle in response. The sounds all originated from the empty rectangle of gravel between the wheel blocks. His equipment showed flat, silent lines. The sounds were for him alone, or rather, for anyone present who was willing to listen. Leo did not feel fear. He felt a profound sense of intrusion, as if he had pressed his ear against the window of a private home. He packed his silent recording gear and sat on a nearby hillside, simply listening to the invisible social club of the night. The voices and laughter would rise and fall for about an hour, then gradually fade away, leaving only the smell of oil and smoke to slowly dissipate. The next day, he sought out the nearest town. And found a retired conductor at the local library. The old man spoke not of ghosts, but of family. The caboose, he explained, was not just an office. It was a place of card games, of shared meals from a tin pail. Of stories told to pass the endless miles. It was a bubble of warmth and light rolling through the cold, dark countryside. The laughter was the sound of that insulation, of bonds forged in motion. When the caboose was made obsolete by new technology, it wasn't just a vehicle that was retired. It was a way of life, a tiny, rolling community that was dissolved. The empty caboose track, the man suggested, holds on to the echo of that community. The smells are the signature of its function. The voices are the memory of its heart. It is not a sad place, but a loyal one. The space remembers the friendship it contained. Leo left the track for good. He filed no report, published no findings. Some frequencies, he believes, are not meant to be recorded, only experienced. He now understands that certain places are not haunted by individuals, but by atmospheres. By moods. The empty caboose track is haunted by the ghost of a good shift's end, by the comfort of company after solitude, by the quiet joy of a journey completed together. And on certain still nights, if you stand at just the right distance, you can still catch the scent of oil. And hear the echo of a joke you were never meant to understand. Shared between friends in a room that is no longer there. On the vast, flat expanse of the northern prairie, there is a place where ambition simply ran out of steam. It is known as Prairie Siding. Here, the railroad tracks do not terminate at a station or a loading dock. They simply stop. One moment there are parallel lines of steel and weathered oak ties, stretching with geometric purpose toward the horizon. The next, the rails are sheared off, their ends frayed and rusting, surrendered to the wilderness. Beyond lies an ocean of grass, tall and whispering, rolling away under an immense dome of sky. The official story is one of economics. A branch line, proposed to connect distant settlements during a land boom that never materialized. The money dried up, the crews packed their tools, and the tracks were left as they were, a steel cul-de-sac in the middle of nowhere. Maps mark it as an abandoned spur, a footnote in railway history. But those who seek it out, drawn by maps or rumors, find that the story of Prairie End Siding does not end with the last tie. Visitors often notice the footprints first. Not fresh impressions in mud, for the ground is dry and hard. Instead, they appear as subtle, permanent depressions in the wooden ties themselves, leading away from the track's abrupt end. They are the vague shapes of boot heels and soles, worn into the grain as if by decades of passage. They point unmistakably away from the rails, stepping off the last tie and vanishing into the dense wall of grass. To follow that implied path is to enter another world. The grass closes overhead, taller than a person, its dry stalks sighing with every breath of wind. The sky narrows to a thin blue strip above. And in this swallowed space, people report a distinct, unsettling sensation of company. They hear it as a soft, rhythmic sound just behind the whisper of the grass. The steady, unmistakable cadence of breathing. Not their own, but something keeping pace a few steps back. It is a calm, measured sound, neither threatening nor friendly, simply present. A quick turn reveals nothing. Only the swaying grass, already stilling as if no one had passed. Yet the feeling of a presence remains, a patient shadow just outside the edge of sight. Some have described the faint smell of old wool and dust, the scent of a work jacket hung in a sunbeam. Historians have pieced together fragments. The line was built by hand, by crews of men far from home, laying track into the unknown. Work stopped abruptly in the autumn of 1913. Payroll records show the men were discharged right here, their final wages paid beside the unfinished end of steel. They shouldered their kits and walked, east toward the distant main line, leaving their work and their footprints behind in the prairie soil. The phenomenon at the siding defies simple ghost story logic. It is not a haunting of tragedy, but perhaps one of inertia. An echo of that moment of cessation, when motion met absolute stillness. The sound of breathing could be the residual memory of tired men, pausing at the world's edge before turning toward an uncertain future. The footprints are their final mark on the project they built. A permanent record of their departure. Modern visitors, armed with recorders and sensors, have tried to capture proof. Audio devices sometimes pick up the faint, phantom breath, but it is often dismissed as wind through grass. Yet the most consistent evidence is subjective, a deep and primal feeling reported independently by many. The certainty that you are not walking alone in that grass. Some leave the siding quickly, unnerved by the persistent companion. Others find a strange comfort in it, a sense of shared solitude. They sit on the last tie, watching the endless prairie, and feel the presence settle nearby, like a fellow traveler resting after a long walk. As the sun dips low, painting the grass in gold and long shadows, the breathing seems to soften, blending with the evening breeze. The footprints on the ties grow indistinct in the fading light. It is a place that holds no malice, only a profound and lingering pause. Prairie End Siding remains a destination for the curious. They stand where the tracks stop, look at the footprints pointing into the unknown. And listen. The message is not one of warning, but of quiet accompaniment. A reminder that every ended journey leaves an echo in its wake. And that in the vast and empty places, you might just hear the breath of those who stopped here before you. Forever on the verge of taking the next step into the tall, whispering grass. On the outskirts of a fading industrial town lies the red dust rail yard. It is a sprawling, abandoned switching yard, a graveyard of rusted track and dormant signals. The gravel and hard-packed earth between the rails, for nearly an acre, are stained a deep, rusty crimson. Geologists have taken samples, chemists have run analyses, but no definitive explanation exists. The iron content is high, but not extraordinarily so. There are no records of a major chemical fire, no evidence of industrial waste that could account for the pervasive, uniform hue. The red dust simply is, a permanent mystery ground into the earth. By day, the yard is still and silent, the red earth seeming to soak up the sunlight. But after dark, the activity begins. Witnesses, usually rail historians or urban explorers drawn by the strange stain, report seeing shadows. These are not the vague, shifting shapes of the night. They are defined, human-like silhouettes that appear beside the rails within the stained area. They do not stand or walk, but kneel. Their forms are hunched, focused, and they perform a slow, deliberate motion, as if scraping or digging at the red earth with invisible tools. There is no sound of metal on stone, only the profound silence of the yard, making the visual pantomime even more unsettling. The shadows are not interactive. They do not respond to light or sound. A flashlight beam passes through them, illuminating the red ground beneath. They appear singly or in small groups, their movements weary and repetitive. After a time, they simply fade from view, as if their allotted task is complete, only to reappear elsewhere in the stained zone moments later, resuming their endless, silent excavation. The yard's history is one of constant, grueling labor. For the better part of a century, this was a vital hub for repairing and maintaining freight cars. They dealt with rust, with leaking loads, with the constant grit and grime of continental trade. The most common, most endless task was the scraping. Scraping away rust, scraping away caked mud, scraping away the residues of countless unknown cargoes. To prepare the cars for inspection and repair. It was a humble, foundational act of maintenance, a battle against entropy fought with wire brushes and chipping hammers. No single tragedy marks the yard. Instead, it is a site of accumulated toil. The yard was finally shut down and the crews disbanded. It began as a patch and slowly spread, as if seeping up from below, until it covered the exact area where the most intensive scraping work was done. Modern paranormal investigators have set up night vision cameras and motion sensors. The sensors do not trigger. The shadows do not register on thermal imaging. They are visible only to the human eye, or to standard video recordings, where they appear as patches of deeper darkness. Attempts to interact, to pour water or mark the ground where a shadow kneels, yield no result. The shadows are indifferent, locked in their cycle. To stand at the edge of the red earth as night falls is to witness a memorial to work itself. The kneeling shadows are not ghosts of individuals, but an echo of a posture, of a motion repeated millions of times. The red dust is their monument. It is as if the very soil, impregnated with the sweat, the iron filings, the particulate matter of decades of labor, finally manifested the color of that effort. And the shadows are the permanent afterimage, the kinetic memory of the workforce, compelled to continue their foundational task in perpetuity. They are not digging for anything, nor burying anything. They are simply scraping, maintaining a space that no longer exists. Tending to rails that carry nothing. It is a haunting of pure routine, a spectral imprint of the human back bent in labor. Forever trying to clean, to repair, to hold the line against decay. The red dust rail yard is a place where the weight of work settled into the land, staining it, and where the memory of that work continues, silent and dedicated, under the watch of the moon, a testament to the invisible hands that once kept the world moving. On a forgotten stretch of coastal railroad, where the tracks run along a high granite bluff above the sea, there is a place known as the Last Signal Spur. It is a passing loop, built to allow trains to wait while others went by. The small, wooden signal box is still there, a salt-bleached shed leaning against the wind. Its levers are frozen with rust, its glass windows long since gone to shards. And mounted on its roof, a single, bronze signal bell sits silently under the sky. Its clapper motionless, its purpose seemingly ended by time. This place is defined by its emptiness and its sound. The wind is the constant voice, rushing up the cliff face with a low, endless moan. The crash of waves far below provides a rhythmic bass note. But at exactly 2 o'clock in the morning, every night without fail, a new sound punctuates this natural chorus. It is the clear, pure, resonant strike of a bell. A single, unwavering tone that cuts through the wind and surf. It is not a ghostly echo or a faint impression. It is the sound of solid, heavy bronze being struck with definitive force. The note hangs in the salt air, vibrant and complete, before being slowly torn apart by the wind. It rings once. Only once. Then, silence returns. Not the same silence as before, but a deeper, more attentive quiet, as if the landscape itself is listening to the aftermath of its own announcement. The bell does not ring again at 2:01, or 2:05. It will not sound until the next night, at the same precise moment, as if governed by a celestial clock. Those who have camped there, drawn by the legend, speak of setting watches, of counting down the seconds. They are never disappointed. At 2 a.m., the bell speaks its single, solitary word into the dark. The history of this spur is one of vigil and tragedy. Railroad logs indicate it was a crucial, yet lonely, post for a signalman in the early days of the line. His duty was simple but vital. When the night freight from the north was running late, he was to hold the southbound coastal express on the spur until it passed. His signal to the express engineer that the track was clear was the single strike of that roof-mounted bell. The last man to hold the post was an elderly signalman named Arthur Vail. On a foggy December night in 1912, the northbound freight was severely delayed. Arthur Vail, following his orders, held the southbound express on the spur. The logs, and subsequent inquiry, state that at 2 o'clock in the morning, Vail received the telegraphed all clear. He turned the signal to green and, as was his personal ritual, stepped outside to strike the bell once, to signal the waiting engineer. The express pulled out. What Vail could not have known, in the thick fog, was that a landslide had quietly covered the northbound tracks just a mile up the line. The delayed freight had struck it and derailed moments before. The southbound express, having just received the all clear, rounded a bend and plowed into the wreckage. It was a catastrophic collision. Arthur Vail, upon hearing the distant, muffled crash, is said to have walked out onto the bluff and simply vanished. This tragedy imbues the bell's single strike with profound meaning. Paranormal researchers posit that the event created a temporal knot. A moment of such immense responsibility and catastrophic error. That it looped upon itself. The bell does not ring as a memorial. It rings because, in the fabric of that place, it is always 2 a.m. on that December night. The signalman is still performing his final, faithful duty. Striking the bell to release a train onto a track that is, for him, still clear. The single strike is the pinpoint of the disaster, the exact moment of the mistake that could not be undone. To be present at the last signal spur at 2 in the morning is to witness a hinge moment in time, forever swinging on a single, clear note. The lesson here is one of isolated duty and the weight of a single action. The bell is not haunted. It continues to perform its function with impeccable timing, forever separated from the horrible outcome that followed. It reminds us that some signals are sent but never received as intended. And that in certain lonely places, history does not move forward in a line, but circles one terrible, beautiful, and precise moment. Ringing out its clear, solitary note into the endless dark, once per night, forever. In the high desert, where the land is a flat, cracked plate and the wind is a constant, sculpting force, there exists a lonely stretch of railroad known as Wind Car Siding. The tracks here are still maintained, a shining pair of lines that vanish into the shimmering horizon. But they see only one scheduled train a week. For the other 6 days, the siding is a place of silence and sky. That is, until the wind picks up. The locals know the behavior of the wind here is peculiar. It does not just blow. It channels itself down the length of the tracks as if following a predetermined route, gathering speed and focus between the raised gravel beds. And when it reaches a certain sustained velocity, the symphony begins. It starts with a low, resonant hum, the sound of air being forced beneath a heavy, rolling mass. Then comes the rhythmic, metallic clatter of couplings, a rapid-fire clicking and clacking that builds in complexity. The distinct, hollow rumble of empty boxcars rolling over joins in. Loose metal, perhaps a simulated hatch or a chain, rattles with a frantic, chaotic percussion. To the ear, it is unmistakable. It is the sound of a long, heavy freight train passing at speed. The audio illusion is so perfect that people instinctively look up and down the tracks, expecting to see the source of the noise. But the experience does not end with sound. Those who stand on the gravel ballast between the tracks, or even on the wooden ties, report a distinct, physical sensation. A deep, subsonic vibration rises through the soles of their feet, traveling up their legs. It is the felt resonance of immense weight passing over steel, a tremor that seems to originate from the ground itself. It is not the shudder of the earth moving, but the precise, rhythmic shudder of something moving across it. The combination of the roaring sound in the ears and the thrumming vibration in the bones creates a powerful, unsettling certainty. A geophysicist named Clara was tasked with studying unique wind patterns in the region. Her instruments detected nothing unusual about the air pressure or velocity at wind car siding. Yet, when the afternoon winds began to howl, she heard the phantom train with her own ears. Skeptical, she placed seismic sensors on the rail bed. As the sound of the invisible freight reached its peak, her instruments registered a minute but distinct vibration pattern. It was not the chaotic shaking of wind. It was a harmonic, oscillating pattern, a series of precise, repeating tremors that matched the theoretical cadence of wheels passing over rail joints at 60 miles per hour. The data was clear. The ground was reacting as if under immense, moving weight, but there was no weight to be measured, only wind. Clara walked out between the tracks during a lull. As the next gust built, the sounds returned. And with them, the vibration climbed through her boots. She closed her eyes. The roaring air became the drag of 100 cars. The vibration became the pounding rhythm of the wheels. For a moment, her scientific mind was overridden by a primal, spatial awareness. Something was occupying this space, moving through it, defined by sound and force alone. She spent the following days researching not meteorology, but history. She discovered that decades earlier, wind car siding was not a lonely outpost. It was a major artery. A legendary, mile-long drag of empty ore cars, nicknamed the Wind Snake by crews, would roll through here daily, pulled by straining locomotives. The sound was a constant, the vibration a fixture of life. The wind, it seemed, had not forgotten the pattern. Clara developed a theory. The specific alignment of the tracks, the precise gauge, the composition of the gravel ballast, all created a perfect natural wind instrument. But more than that, the sustained, repetitive bombardment of sound and vibration from the real trains had, in a sense, taught the place how to behave. The physics of the wind now replicated the physics of the train. It was an echo, not in time, but in form. The siding had learned its purpose so well it continued to perform it, using the only force left available. Clara published a brief, dry paper on anomalous harmonic ground vibrations in linear wind corridors. She never mentioned the sound of rattling metal or the feeling in her bones. Some data is personal. She now understands why the few railroad workers who still service the line treat the siding with a kind of wry respect. They hear the ghost of the old wind snake still running its route, powered by the desert air. That the memory of motion and sound can be baked into the landscape, waiting for the right key, in this case the wind, to unlock it and play the old, roaring song once more. In the deep river valley towns, where the main line traces the water's edge, there is a siding everyone knows to avoid. It is a place of rust and overgrown gravel, with no official name on company schematics. The locals, however, have a name for it. They call it the track of the train that never stops. By day, it is utterly ordinary. A spur of neglected track that curves off the main line and disappears into a thick stand of pine. The rails are dull brown, the switch is frozen with disuse. There are no buildings, no signs, no reason for any train to ever go there. But by night, the story changes. It begins with a vibration, a low hum felt more than heard through the floorboards of nearby homes. Then comes the distant, rising wail of a horn, not the standard two-blast warning, but a long, sustained cry. That seems to carry a strange, mournful urgency. The sound swells into the full, thunderous roar of a diesel locomotive at speed, the clatter of wheels on rails, the rush of heavy cars moving fast. It sounds for all the world like a full express train, barreling down the forgotten siding. People rush to their windows. They see nothing. The tracks remain empty under the moonlight. The pine branches still. The sound crescendos right past their homes, shaking the glass in the panes, and then fades away down the line, leaving only silence and a profound sense of dislocation in its wake. This auditory phantom has been reported for generations. Railway officials have no record of any night traffic on that spur. Maintenance crews find no evidence of recent passage, no polished rails or disturbed gravel. Yet the experience is so visceral, so physically tangible, that it cannot be dismissed as mere imagination. The most unsettling accounts come from the few who have ventured onto the tracks themselves after dark. They speak of a sudden, deep tremor in the ground, a rhythmic thumping that travels up through the soles of their boots. The air grows heavy, charged with a static energy. Then, far down the curved track, a light appears. Not the single headlamp of a modern engine, but twin pinpricks that grow with terrifying speed. They are described as a harsh, bone-white light that illuminates the trees from behind, casting long, racing shadows. The roar becomes deafening, a physical pressure against the chest. The vibration is so intense it feels as though the bones themselves might shake apart. As the lights bear down, impossibly close, the world does not simply go black. Instead, everything seems to be swallowed by the light itself. A blinding, all-consuming whiteness that erases the tracks, the trees, the very sense of standing on solid ground. There is no impact, no sound of a crash. Just that overwhelming light and thin stillness. The person finds themselves standing alone on the silent, dark tracks, unharmed but deeply shaken. The phantom train vanished as if it never was. Theories are plentiful, but unsatisfying. Some speak of a temporal echo, a recording of a past event trapped in the local geology. Others suggest a collective psychological projection, a story so powerfully believed that it manifests as shared sensory experience. The oldest story, passed down in fragments, tells of a construction train. A work special, rushing down this very spur in the dead of night to reach a washed-out bridge up the line. It was carrying men and materials for an emergency repair. The crew was told nothing could stop them, that they were the only hope for a stranded passenger train further up the valley. They never arrived at the washout. No record of a crash was ever found. The train, and its crew, simply vanished from the ledger books and from the rails. Perhaps the train that never stops is just that, a crew forever in transit. A mission of mercy that never reached its destination. Now replaying its desperate, urgent run through eternity. The blinding light is not one of destruction, but of a purpose so intense it transcends its own ending. They are not ghosts seeking rest, but guardians forever racing toward a crisis that has already passed. Bound to a duty they can never fulfill. Today, the siding remains quiet. The switch is welded shut by the railway, a tacit acknowledgement of the strange reports. But on certain still nights, when the valley mist hangs low, the people in their homes feel the familiar vibration begin. They pause, listen to the long, lonely horn, and feel the rumble pass through the earth and through their bones. They do not look out the window. They simply acknowledge the passing of the unseen, a solemn respect for the crew that never clocks out, forever thundering down the dark track toward a dawn they will never see. Thank you, my dear friend, for walking these haunted abandoned rail sidings with me tonight. The railroads built Kansas. They carried dreams, labor, and countless lives across the prairie. But they also carried fear, tragedy, and final moments that never reached their destination. The sidings remain as silent witnesses. Waiting. Listening. Remembering every train that never arrived. If you ever find yourself near old railroad tracks after dark, remember these stories. Do not stand between the rails. Do not follow lantern lights. And never assume silence means safety. Some trains still run. Just not in ways we understand. Rest well tonight. Keep the lights close. And until our next journey into the shadows, listen carefully. Because the rails are never truly silent.